Right, welcome back, friends. Today we'll be talking about Mars ingress into the sign of Libra. This is the current transit happening. However, if you have this in your natal chart, this video will also apply. We're going to get into the details of it. In fact, the outline that I have in front of me has so much details that I might cut this video into 2 parts, but I'm just going to keep going and see how much I can get through today. So essentially, what we'll be talking about today is what happens when the planet of war enters into the sign that's related to peace. And one of the most important components to remember about this placement is that Mars in the sign of Libra, it's in its exile. The opposing sign to Libra, which is Aries, is the sign that belongs to Mars. It's one of its 2 signs that Mars itself is most comfortable in. So in a lot of ways, Mars is very far from home. And that means Mars is not at ease. So we're talking about a dissonance. We'll see that there's a lot of dissonance, but we're going to work through it. But what we can say at the outset here is that Mars has this very assertive, bold, initiative, direct quality. And that kind of equality doesn't land smoothly in the sign of Libra. And this is because the sign of Libra, one of the reasons, is ruled by Venus. And Venus will filter every action through the lens of relationality and relationships, because the objective of Venus is to establish harmony and then to connect and then to merge. And in the sign of Libra, it comes to have a lot to do with fairness, proportions, symmetry. So Mars finds itself in a field where it has to be diplomatic. It has to have the willingness to go back and forth, to budge. It can't implement its force. It has to choose poise over instinct. Very unnatural for Mars. Hence, Mars is under a lot of pressure and is feeling a lot of tension in the sign of Libra. It's just that Mars has to suppress its own nature for the sake of harmony that the sign of Libra is demanding of it. And as we'll see when we talk about the shadows of this planet, too much suppression from Mars can lead to severe feelings of resentment here and a lot of internal conflict, which is unpleasant. But as I always say, just because we have a certain placement or just because a transit's coming up, it doesn't mean we have to go through hell. The dissonance doesn't have to become our flaw and just stay that way. We can look at it as an invitation to us. Because if we're willing to engage with these symbols, these archetypes in a conscious manner, they can become a learning tool we can leverage. For example, once when one has mastery over this Mars in Libra, you can get a very tactful warrior. That's the kind of archetype that comes out of it. Someone who knows how to employ strategy to have justice and even peace, rather than going to war for it. So in this video, we're going to explore the tension that's inherent in this signature, its psychological challenges, of course, its shadow expressions, and we're going to finish off the video with the soul lessons we can extract or we can get from this placement. And before all of that, I'll give you a quick overview of what Mars is about, what Libra is about, bring them together to see how it works, and then go on from there. And before diving in, and if you'd like to go deeper into your own birth chart, you can see my services at parisayazdi.com or just go to the description below this video. All the links are there. And please remember to like, subscribe, and share. You're helping me tremendously to grow this channel. And the more I can align my life to this side, the more content I can make. And hopefully it's helping people. It's helping you, whoever that's watching it. That's the most important thing to me. That's why I like to make these extensive videos, so that we think and we ponder and we have time to self-reflect. But this is a time-consuming endeavor I've come to realize, a joyful one. But your participation allows me to grow this, which allows me to have more time doing this. And always remember to comment. I love reading them and engaging with you guys. It's one of the best parts of doing this. And of course, thank you for being here today. So now, without further ado, let's get right into it. And let's start with the nature of Mars. It's always important to understand the planet on its own right and terms before we take it into a sign or into a house. This way we can see its elemental nature and what it's trying to do. And talking about elements, fire is the element of Mars. It's the original spark that ignites things into motion. Mars is energy as action and the propulsion that drives things forward. And it's also the energy that penetrates through boundaries. And because of this forward movement, Mars, it's what is generating change, that constant motion. So Mars doesn't sit, wait, deliberate. Mars acts. And Mars in its essence is expressing something of the masculine principle in its pure form. That's why in a lot of the videos, I say Mars is hyper masculine. And I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about a universal archetype or an existential function that is talking about outward motion. And within the premise of this masculine principle, Mars is also independent. It's about willpower and it's about self-reliance, self-starting. So Mars also has this very self-orientation. That's why I'm calling it as hyper-masculine. The sun will take into consideration what's around it. Mars doesn't. Itself is the starting point, the decider, the mover, the doer. So Mars is our capacity to stand alone and to pursue a goal. This is one of the reasons why Mars is considered brave. It doesn't need the cooperation of other people or their help to do things. It just exerts its own force in a singular manner towards an aim. We can also say archetypally, Mars is the warrior. Mars is the archetype of the protector, as well as the athlete, someone who's a competitor. But beyond these token archetypes, on a much deeper level, Mars is the function of motion itself, as I just mentioned. That means without Mars, nothing would be moving, nothing would be changing. There would be no fight for survival, no energy to thrive, no means for assertion of the self to move towards something. And without Mars, it's important to understand that there would be no clear boundaries between the self and the other. Mars is a planet that cuts and severs. It's a planet that's related to logic. It's trying to differentiate things all the time. And when it comes to our self-notion, Mars helps with this. And it says, this is me, that is you. I am not you. And this is also another way that Mars creates opposition. And lastly, very importantly, especially as a human, as a species that lives amongst other species who can have predatory tendencies, Mars can be the predator, but it's also what protects us against the violation of predatory people. So Mars is like this double-edged sword. So when Mars's energy and actions are uncontained and unrestrained, undirected, they represent reactionary actions. So its shadows are related to violence, rage, uncalled for aggression, domination over other people. So Mars can burn the native out, and the native can burn other people out. It can destroy without a cause, without understanding why it's doing what it's doing. This is the shadow of Mars. Like once when Mars is triggered from that shadow aspect of it, it'll start with, I'm doing it because I'm defending. But even when the war is over, that momentum remains and the person's actually thinking that they're defending, but they're actually destroying things around them. And we got to ask, if Mars is left to its own devices, what does it want? What does the Mars in us want? We want to win. We want to move. We want to express our will and our power without restrictions. And I really hope I get a chance to make another video, because as soon as this Mars ingresses in 2025 into the sign of Libra, Saturn is sitting in the opposing sign of Aries in its retrograde phase. They're having this opposition and this face-off. So this very thing that Mars wants to do in its fallen position, this is where all the glitchiness is coming from. How do you win under such suboptimal conditions? How do you exert your will? How can you move? But hopefully I'll get a chance to make that video. I want to stay on point so this video is not super duper uber long. So we'll see when I go over the significations for Libra and bring Mars into the sign of Libra. Mars as a primal force is entering a very cooperative realm, and it has to move through relational dynamics. It has to take into consideration what's just, what's fair, what is harmony and balance. It has to take into consideration the aesthetics of things. So its raw drive either has to become something completely different than what it would do if it was left to its own devices, or it can become very destructive, as we'll see. But before going into that, let's just examine Libra for a quick second. Well, more than 1 second. The first thing I want to say, there's a lot of misconception about Libra. It's often mistaken for being passive, indecisive, or just having the superficial charm, people pleasers. But what is often not realized is that beneath that soft exterior, there's something structurally very powerful, and that is Libra functions like a fulcrum. It's a central pivot point which balances everything. It's Libra that's mediating between opposing forces to establish some kind of an equilibrium between them. And the way it does this to be able to achieve this balance is through cultivating a certain kind of an intelligence. It's the kind of intelligence that can take into consideration multiplicity, multiple perspectives and viewpoints, and it can do this simultaneously. So there's a kind of a genius, a social genius in the sign of Libra. That means the sign of Libra is constantly judging and assessing. It's weighing what's fair, what's proportional, what's relational. So it has this tremendous relational awareness. So if Libra is doing something, if Libra people are doing something where it feels like they're being passive or indecisive or superficial, that's the surface. Behind that, behind the stage, it's like just the wheels are turning, assessing towards what creates balance. Where is the balancing point? So in a lot of ways, Libra's aim is to refine motion and action, and it's directing it through the principle of harmony, proportion, and ethical behavior. It is Libra that turns impulse into intention. And its intentionality is always to create relational dynamics. Another thing to consider about the sign of Libra is of the air element. And the air is about movement. It's about breath. It's about thought. It's acting like a bridge between different parts. It's like the wind that carries the intention of one to the next, to the next, to the many. It's transmitting the information via air. And it's also worth remembering, yes, air can't be contained. And it symbolizes freedom and movement, and not in a particular direction. But in its highest symbolic form, air is not aimless. For example, air is related to the prana, which is the breath of life. It's a subtle current that animates life, that connects this body to its consciousness. It's what gives us vitality. And that allows us to move, be animated, where without air, we would be pretty inert. I think the word for it is dead. So this means that when air is passing through something, it enlivens it. And the sign of Libra has the same quality. Gemini does too. Aquarius is a little bit less because of its fixed nature and it's like a heavy air. But both Gemini and Libra have this enlivening quality. And Libra enlivens through engagement, through social relations. It initiates relational spaces. And it does this through dialogue, connection, and aesthetic arrangement. So it's bringing harmony into motion. It's harmonizing the parts so that they can act in concert. So it's connecting life where life would otherwise be divided. I hope you can hear the contradictions as I'm talking about Libra. I was saying that Mars separates and severs, while Libra is actually trying to bring everything together to do this harmonized, choreographed dance as one, that merging quality that it's in its ruler, Venus. Another component to remember, this sign is related to that goal of life, which is about Kāma. So we have Dharma, Artha, Kāma, and then Moksha. The sign of Libra is related to Kāma, which is about enjoyment. It's the principle of desire. It's about the longing in us. That's what desire is. That initiates motion. It's the way that we are able to connect and to create. So Kāma can include love, pleasure, attraction, and the urge to unite through that desire that comes because you want to have pleasure and you want to enjoy. And if you think about it, in some ways, Kāma is like a spark that stirs life. It stirs us into the kind of actions that we take. It's the desire in us to touch, to be in a relationship, to have a friendship. The Kāma of Libra is shaping the world. It's shaping the world into something shared, something that we have in common, something that we can enjoy together. Like the Kāma of Libra is not a hungry Kāma, like give me more, more, more. It's a desire for connection, for harmony. It's the pleasure in our social dynamics. And then, of course, we have to consider the cardinal modality of the sign of Libra. And we have to think about this now. People are like, well, Libra is passive and it's indecisive. Cardinal signs are anything but. Cardinal signs initiate. They're initiating motion towards a new direction. But in the sign of Libra, it's not doing this through force. Libra initiates through collectiveness, through invitation. Libra's cardinality is promoting dialogue, shared ideas, diplomacy, and through relational grace, not brute force like the Aries cardinal component. And its initiation has an intent behind it, which is to create order by harmonizing the parts that are interacting. It's about creating proportionality, fairness, and again, aesthetic symmetry. It is Venus's sign. Venus has a lot to do with beauty. And talking about Venus as the ruler of the sign of Libra, Venus is the planet of union, love, beauty, and relational intelligence. But it's not its sensual, bodily, and material version of itself the way it is in the sign of Taurus. This is the Venus of the mind. It's the brilliant architect of beauty. Venus here is the harmonizer, the balancer. It's the mind of fairness, justice. Here, Venus doesn't love just through emotions and feelings. Venus's love in the sign of Libra is working with ideal forms, the ideal love. So there's always this higher aim in creating greater balance, greater proportions to be more inclusive. And then there's another thing about this sign here. And while we're talking about Venus, this is the masculine side of Venus. This is the part of Venus that it's externally oriented. So the masculine principle here is saying something about Venus's actions, how it's activated. And in the sign of Libra, actions are always intentional and directional. So the sign of Libra, this intention and the direction of it is to always shape the environment in such a way that it can be inclusive. So it's supporting those kinds of actions. And this masculine quality in the sign of Libra is unlike the sensual and the receptive nature that's in the sign of Taurus. That masculine component in Libra makes it a sign that's relational and architectural. That intentionality is coming in again, especially as an intelligent sign. So its action is about exertion of intelligence. And it's through that it creates harmony and design. So the sign of Libra, even though it's owned by Venus, a feminine principle planet. So it's not going to be about emotional sensitivity. It's more about intelligent structuring of dualities. So Libra is not going to initiate through domination, through its authority. Its aim is to initiate through alignment, creating alignments. It doesn't want to conquer you. It wants to create an equilibrium and a balanced position with you. And we got to remember, this is not softness and flippy floppy nature of Libra, the way that it's often described. There's actually precision here. There's the principle of measured will when we come to the sign of Libra. And we can talk about will because it is of the masculine principle. So we can say that Libra is intelligence at work. And remember who's exalted here, the most rational planet about work, Saturn, but a topic for another day. And Libra is the rational lover. And yes, Libra is the designer and the architect of beauty. And Libra is the strategist when it comes to fairness, justice, and equality. So Libra is not passive. Libra is deliberate. And yes, it will pause to think about things and it seems indecisive, but it's not out of its weakness. It's out of its consideration. This sign will pause, reflect, even give you vague answers. Yes, it's buying itself time because it knows the significance of action and its impact. So it's not that it's unclear and that's why it's not acting. It's weighing clarity from multitude of angles. That takes time. Some people's processing system works faster than others. So you can be a Libra and you can be a Libra and you have different processing time. However, Libra people take their time and this is the reason behind it, even if they're not conscious of it. This is occurring on a subconscious level. And we have to remember, we're making these assessments not because that's the nature of Libra, but they're saying something about the world we live in today and what it values. And what do we value? We equate speed with strength, force, certainty, intelligence, whereas Libra's commitment to balance can look like indecisiveness, indecision, and hesitation to us. But that pause, and this is a masculine sign, is not a lack of will. It's the presence of judgment. And I don't mean judgment like you're being judgy. Some Libras can, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about discernment. Libra will take the time to evaluate ethics. It's evaluating what's relational or not. So to call Libra passive, I'm like, the Libra's social justice warrior here right now, it seems. And Mars is going there. Maybe that's where it's coming from because I don't have anything in Libra. Moon opposing it. But to call Libra passive is to mistake its strategic restraint for inaction. To call it indecisive is to overlook the precision of its decision making. I fought for you, Libra people. And now we're gonna jump into the kind of paradox that comes about when Mars enters into the sign of Libra. And you got to remember, Mars is the fastest planet. And now we're going into a sign where we need to just take a second to contemplate. A second could be an eternity for Mars. Let's just keep that in mind. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Oh my God, I don't know. I think I might be able to finish this video in one day. We'll see. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. And while on that break, I realized I told a lie. I do have something in Libra, but it's Pluto. It's one of the outer planets, generational. But let us continue. And I'm glad that I got that fire in me to fight for Libra. So what happens when Mars enters Libra? When the fire of will and action enters a very cooperative sign. And it always becomes a question and a conundrum. That's why I was calling it a paradox. How do I exert my will, my personal individual will, because that's what Mars is about, with the will of many? This is one of the hardest things to do in life. Mars is individualistic. Libra is democratic. Mars wants to tell you this is how it ought to be. Libra says, let's take a vote. So right away, we encounter this paradox and this dissonance. And there's another paradox. Sheer will, sheer force, sheer emotion, which is Mars, has to now exert all of this in a very measured way. Its impulse to just go head first through everything must now evaluate, must become about inquiring what other people want. So self-assertion has to go through the filter of other people. And this is a very difficult thing for Mars to do. It's like Mars is illiterate when it comes to this. And again, taking Mars's individualistic nature into consideration, Mars is direct. It's bold. It does what it feels like it needs to do very instinctually, says what it needs to say very boldly, and it wants to clear the way with all of its sharp edges. Mars wants to act now. It wants to act fast and decisively based on what it needs to do. But what is Libra doing to Mars is constantly introducing an angle to it, another angle, another angle. So that forward trajectory, straightforward line of Mars, it's going this way, and then suddenly it's like, oh, there's that person, come to a halt to change his direction, to now take that perspective into consideration. So Mars is constantly facing consequences for its own innate natural actions in the sign of Libra. It's like Mars finds itself in a hall of mirrors. Every action is being reflected back to it. And because there's such an oppositional nature in this placement, everything feels like a consequence. Can almost feel like punishment, that I can't be myself. Why do I have to take so many people into consideration? Mars really gets to feel its impact with the relational dynamics that it has. It gets very overt reaction from people, and that's because of the way it's asserting itself. So Mars in Libra has a tendency, Mars in Libra people have a tendency to feel very conflicted internally. So we want to talk about hesitation. When you actually put Mars in the sign of Libra, you can get that hesitation. Like, you're walking down the street, someone's walking towards you, you don't know which way to go. Like, I still need to go. I can't stop. It's like in that moment, it doesn't come to our mind that maybe we should stop and let someone else pass. We remain in motion and we don't know which way to go. And again, that's because there are too many angles to be considered in the sign of Libra. So there's a sense of overwhelm here. And Mars in Libra has a tendency to become overreactive rather than being its own usual assertive self. It's like Mars is cornered here to constantly overcompensate. And this is overcompensation in the tension that exists between wanting to act and needing to cooperate. So Mars here is like, do I have the approval? Do I go? Do I not go? So it gets these tendencies that are very counterintuitive to it. It's always torn between self-will and will of other people. This is like finding a warrior who's just about to pull its sword, but then it's not sure. Is this the time to pull out the sword? Or am I just supposed to offer a hand here? How does this work? The sign of Libra is given a script to Mars where Mars has to take the notion of symmetry and balance into consideration, where Mars just wants to move forward. I see my destination. What do you mean I have to make a pit stop here and then make a pit stop here? This creates that conflicting feeling internally. Like I'm sacrificing myself and my own will for the will of other people. Why am I doing this? And Mars definitely doesn't want to stop, pause, measure, weigh things out. So in a lot of ways, Mars's function becomes distorted. Its clarity and decisiveness gets very blurred. It feels like it's being censored to constantly put on this relational filter in terms of how it can act. Libra is constantly bending that straight line that Mars is naturally on. That's how it moves. And as to state the obvious, this is pure dissonance when it comes to how Mars functions. It's like asking a soldier who's been conditioned and trained to just take orders and act without any kind of a hesitation to now just become a diplomat suddenly. Mars wants to act unanimously, not to take a vote. So this makes Mars always feel delayed, like it has setbacks. People are standing in its way, and this transit can very much bring this feeling. And one of the consequences is that we can become overreactive. We can feel very frustrated during this transit. And if we have this in our natal chart, this is a lifelong process of negotiating with it to find better ways. In many respects, it's almost like the battlefield that's supposed to be out there. That's where Mars is supposed to be. The battlefield becomes something that's within ourselves. And another thing to consider, I was mentioning earlier that the sign of Libra has a lot to do with Kāma, about enjoyment and pleasure. And Mars isn't exactly a planet of enjoyment. And it's certainly not trying to find its enjoyment the way Libra does, which is to create union and merging between things that are relational. Mars wants to cut things, separate things. It's in a mission of pursuit, overcoming things, defeating things. It is a planet of motion, but it's definitely not inspired by pleasure or to seek enjoyment. Motion of Mars is driven by necessity. It's for defense. So in a lot of ways, Mars is completely ignorant to the kind of enjoyment that the sign of Libra is seeking. That's because Mars acts because it has to, not because it desires it. And other factors related to Mars's discomfort, Mars is in its exile, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Mars knows how to concentrate its energy, create a focal point, and then shoot. It's not about distribution of energy, which Libra is about. And that distribution of energy that's in Libra, that's what makes it inclusive. Mars just wants to cut through things here. It does not want to be shaped by its surrounding. And one of the reasons why they say, like, Libra has superficial charm is because Libra is taking everything into consideration. It's kind of being shaped by that moment and the situation that it finds itself in. Mars doesn't have the capacity to do this. So Mars in Libra has to work extra hard. During this transit, we're going to have to work extra hard because we're going to feel a sense of urgency within ourselves. And we need to be fast. We need to do it now. But then we're going to be constantly forced to stop and think, is this fair? Is this the right thing to do right now? Is it being inclusive? So this transit or this signature in itself is saying that there's a feeling that feels alien. But to go back to that Kāma aspect, and I always talk about this with maturity, these planets also, these drives within us mature over time. And we got to remember that Mars is the planet related to Dharma. So it's mission oriented. It needs to have a sense of purpose and then act towards it. In a Kāma sign with maturity, Mars will learn. That Kāma aspect is important because essentially if you go even deep within the nature of Mars, its sense of purpose is coming from a kind of a desire. There's a longing that's making it pursue. Even that initiation, that's bringing a kind of a joy. So in a lot of ways, we can see that Dharma needs Kāma. So with maturity, there can be a refinement of this dharmic aspect of Mars in the sign of Libra. We become the kind of a person who doesn't act from the ego, that self-centric position of it's about me, what I want. We begin to understand what's ethical. We fight, but we fight for balance because we can't change the nature of Mars. Mars will never be Venus. And yes, we continue to move, but we move in proportion. We learn the rhythm that's in the sign of Libra. So the best that we can do through a lot of maturity is to transform raw impulse into some kind of a conscious choice. Instincts have to become principled action. So, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, I'm going to touch more on this when we come to the lessons, the soul lessons of this placement, but I do want to take us to a place that there's a purpose for this. We can work with this energy. even though it's not easy. But before going to the soul lessons, let's just quickly go over some of the prominent shadows that can come out of this signature. And with the shadow in this video, I'm gonna pose some questions that we can ask ourselves if we have this in our natal chart or through this transit, kind of a self-inventory, so that we understand where these shadows are coming from and what they're about. And to start with, we can say that Mars and Libra can become very passive aggressive because in the sign of Libra, direct action can feel super risky. Like Mars still needs to act because it's Mars, but it can resort to indirect tactics. Like it can say one thing and then do another thing. So conflict is still there, but it's just hidden. It's hidden behind this facade of I'm cooperating, while internally the intent is completely different. Like we could offer a friend help out of nowhere, we just offer it. But then internally in that same moment, we resent the fact that we did that. Instead of saying no, we take the friend for a ride and we start punishing them. Like we'll show up late. We'll start saying inappropriate things. We start projecting things onto them. And it's just doing things in a very half-hearted kind of way. We're irritated and still insisting, no, I'm totally fine. I don't mind at all. But even saying that comes out wrong. It can rub people the wrong way. So the self-inventory question is to understand what your will is. What is it that you truly want to do? Why are you acting to be okay with something where you're actually not okay about it at all? And this is revealing the kind of conflicts that we're grappling with internally and how we can start to address it. Another shadow in the sign of Libra with Mars there is a lot of manipulation instead of being direct, because we still have to respect the nature of Mars. As I keep saying, Mars will not change its nature. So we have to respect that Mars is in Libra. It's not just all about Libra now. So let's say Mars, which is usually direct, wants something in the sign of Libra. And the sign of Libra never wants to offend other people. It doesn't want to be forward and just say it. Like people who have prominent Libra in their chart, they don't directly ask for something. They'll go back and forth with you because they're trying to assess what you're comfortable with also. They don't want to overstep. And eventually, Libra people will ask for what they want, but in a cooperative manner. But Mars here can start to do some seriously weird maneuvers. So what they'll go for is that they have the outcome in mind and they want to control the outcome by influencing other people. For example, Mars and Libra people are very good at putting words in your mouth or making you feel like they have to give you what you want. So there's an assertion of will here, but in a very distorted kind of way. It's a manipulation tactic. So it's worth understanding, like as a self-inventory question again, like what need am I trying to meet? And why is it that I have such a hard time directly asking for help, for example? Why am I trying to control the outcome by controlling the other person's actions? And there's usually something wrong with the assertiveness of Mars and Libra. So we're talking about its sense of confidence, inhibitions that are coming because it had to repress and suppress itself. So this act of looking ourselves will allow us to understand this. Another quality, shadow quality of Mars, it can go from overthinking to overreacting. And we got to remember, I'm saying this because this is an air sign. So it's connected to our intelligence, to our thinking process. And Mars itself is also about logic. So Mars in Libra can overthink things and it can actually come to conclusions about justifications of its actions. Its actions can either be stalled by overthinking, so it can go into that paralysis mode and activity, which is so against Mars's nature. So the Mars within us feels like it's suffocating. It's going to be self-punishing. Like it'll be weighing things to end of eternity. What's right, what's wrong, what's fair, I can't act. Or, again, excuse my language, Mars can completely lose his shit from this when it's in this sign. And it can start breaking all the rules. And then it'll come to justify this as this was the only logical thing for me to do. There was no other way out. But it actually cornered itself into that position. Like someone texts you and you're just sitting there deliberating for a week. Do I message this person back? If I message this person, they'll do that. Because you're also trying to control the outcomes, right? In terms of how this connection and how this relational dynamic should go. So you keep delaying the talk. And then instead of eventually sending a message that's cooperative, Mars here can just send a very blunt message, which cuts all the ties, and then I'll come to again justify it. I had no option. This is the only thing I could do. So a self-inventory question is, how do I start to overanalyze things? And that becomes a kind of an inhibition for me. And then how does that start to build pressure? And it builds till I just explode and start acting irrational and rash. It's good to understand our trigger points, and understanding this component will help us to just be more composed, more consistent. Mars in Libra can have a lot of inconsistencies in how fast it connects with people and how severely it cuts its ties. And again, going back to one of the worst and most common outcomes that comes from Mars in Libra is the feeling of resentment. And I would argue this is probably one of the worst shadows of Mars in the sign of Libra, because it's often hidden behind a smile, between diplomatic gestures, attempts, quote unquote, to keep the peace. But because Mars is about the will and Libra is about harmony, Mars always feels torn between asserting itself and how to keep and maintain the social equilibrium and the social balance of things. So when we constantly suppress, repress, and silence our own drive to say, to act, to be, when we compromise too much just for the sake of avoiding friction, the will doesn't dissipate. That drive doesn't just turn off. It just sits there and festers. In a lot of ways, Mars is not getting its needs met, and it's repressing and suppressing itself. The Mars in us, that drive that's in us. And all of this hardens to feelings of severe resentment for other people. It can also come out as feeling of guilt, self-betrayal, self-denial, and a lot of frustration, which is very hard to negotiate with. And this can go back to that passive aggressive thing too, right? So let's say, for example, our partner wants something of us and we keep repressing what we need and how we need to act. And we just keep silent for the sake of keeping the peace. But eventually we'll find ourselves so irritated, feeling very icky on the inside, because it's like I've abandoned myself. I'm going to remember Mars has that self-orientation to it. It's individualistic. So it can't deny its own needs. So the resentment with it here is huge because it can't feel like itself. So the self-inventory here is, am I constantly suppressing myself and my own internal needs to just avoid conflict? And is that unspoken tension turning into resentment? And what is the resentment doing to me? And what's a better way of dealing with this? How can I express myself and maintain my relationships, peace, harmony, and etc.? And as a last point, I'm going to bring up, there are many, but gotta keep this in bounds. We can have, as a shadow point, we can have control of others with Mars in Libra. Mars in general, in a lot of places, signs, and houses can indicate control issues because Mars represents the will and having goals, having an objective, a destination we're trying to reach. So when Mars feels that its direct assertion feels socially risky or morally complex, it resorts to managing other people's choices. It gets into the business of managing other people's emotions and even their perception to maintain this illusion of balance that it's creating or maintaining, and without appearing forceful, while essentially it's controlling every component to have its own objective met. Again, it goes back to that manipulation part too, right? And because it's in the sign of Libra, Mars's control here can be cloaked as something that's elegant, strategic, charm, reason, and fairness. But when we look underneath this, the shadow of it, there's a strong need to assert ourselves, but without owning it directly. So rather than saying, I want this, and letting other people feel however way they want to feel, and then negotiate, Mars and Libra people will start to lead people in a way to make choices that will benefit it and what it needs. So it's preserving the appearance of harmony, but it's pulling strings. So we can see with all of these examples, we're talking about byproduct of misaligned actions. That is, Mars wants to be bold, it wants to move outwardly, it wants to be direct. But in Libra, it's forced to contain all of this, to weigh it, to measure it. So there's a lot of repression of our Mars drive in the sign of Libra. It's about misplaced emotion, misplaced action. And all of that said, we should remember that our shadows are not our flaws. per se. They're just showing us where we have unmet needs, where we're not nurtured enough, taken care of enough. And in the case of fire, in the case of Mars, Mars's fire doesn't have an outlet in the sign of Libra. So its desires are being denied. Its true essence, beyond its desire, its essence is being denied. So it naturally produces a lot of shadow sides. And like any other placement as shadows or psychological shadows, however way you want to conceptualize it and frame it, the way out is to go in, which means to see the shadows, and it's not to get rid of them, but to incorporate them, because they're saying something about essential needs that we have that have been rejected or repressed. So the way is to actually meet the shadow and to meet its needs in a healthy way. That's how we get to integrate our shadows and feel whole. And the highest expression of Mars is when Mars in a sign like Libra becomes something like an ethical warrior. It's someone who doesn't act for ego again, but acting for justice. Is the kind of a warrior who wields the sword with conscious proportion. It's the soldier who acts to serve harmony rather than to create chaos. This is that maturation process that I'm talking about. This transit's going to bring things into the forefront. Yeah, things are happening to us, but when are things not happening to us, for better or for worse? But the point is, what are we learning? How are we evolving? And we could say when Mars is super matured here, when it has very good understanding of life and itself, Mars becomes a lover who actually protects beauty. It's not someone who just wants connection, but it's also someone who has the power to defend it, to protect it, to shape it, to sacrifice for it. So Mars is still being Mars, as you can see, but now its aims and goals at the ends are aligned with what the sign of Libra is about. So in this respect, Mars is in many ways at service of Venus. And in a lot of mythologies, there is that connection with them. So Mars in the sign of Libra doesn't have to feel like it's getting neutered, but it's becoming disciplined. It's becoming aligned. And in that way, it's becoming more noble. And perhaps most profoundly is that Mars can become the artist of justice. It doesn't use blunt force to carve something out. It's intentional motion. So a seasoned Mars here has measured actions. So Mars doesn't have to lose its fire in the sign of Libra, and it is an air sign. It can fan the flame. It just has to learn how to use that fire with aim, in proportion and with purpose, that sense of dharma that's in Mars. So I talked a lot. I think this is good for Mars in Libra for now. And I really, really want to talk about that opposition to Saturn, but I'm going to try my best to make another video, even if it's short. But for now, if this video has resonated with you, I invite you to like, comment, and share. And please comment, because that actually keeps the conversation alive. And everyone experiences things differently. And it's beautiful when we share and we get to see how it's unfolding itself in different lives. And again, you can explore my offerings, readings, all the links are in the description box below. And to close, may your will be clear but never cruel. May your actions always be steady and not impulsive. And may your fire know how to move with grace and not to divide, but to light up the world. And there's enough air and fire combination here that we can light up the world instead of burning it down. That's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.